The number was 50. Not 5,000, not 500. $50. Nearly invisible on a city ledger, enormous on a kitchen table where a bus pass and a grocery list sit elbow to elbow. Elena Moreno stood at the thin wooden rail of the Providence Municipal Court, the varnish worn smooth by 1,000 similar mornings. Her case number was a brief code, some letters, some digits, but the code hid a life arranged around clocks she didn't own. Outside, the rain had exhausted itself into a mist. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed the democracy of paperwork. The court clerk called names in a cadence that was nearly a lullaby if you forgot what the names were walking toward. People shuffled forward, told their versions of lateness and noise and parking and permits. A wheel turned like the weather. When they called Moreno, a small quiet settled. Not special in any way, except to Elena, whose breath learned new arithmetic. She had slept 3 hours after the hospital floor, the mop ringer complaining like an old friend. The bus had been late. The second bus was early. The schedule in her pocket was creased into a map no one else could read. $50 had become more, late fee, notice, threat, like a story retold by someone who disliked you. And then there was the bench. Judge Frank Caprio did not look like a hammer. He looked like a man who had been in rooms where stories unfold and are not always improved by speed. He read the paper in front of him. Looked up. "Reader two, what happened?" The question had a soft landing but carried weight. It did not presume a villain. It did not prepackage a verdict. It asked for a human translation of numbers. Elena felt the courtroom tilt toward her voice. She had learned that telling the truth can sometimes sound like making excuses if you don't breathe first. She breathed. She told him about a double shift, a boy with a fever, a bus that didn't come. She said the 50, the way some people say winter. The courtroom is a place where silence works. The judge listened without interruption, which is a kind of mercy you can hear. Rules are necessary in a city where lives must fit together, but rules alone cannot carry a person. In that unhurried pause, Elena felt that justice, if it existed, might be a bridge built from both sides. Law, walking toward life. Life, walking toward law. The humming lights continued. The clerk waited with a pen that could go either way. $50 stood there, unafraid of anyone, daring the morning to decide what it was worth. Before the courtroom, there was a hallway that smelled faintly of lemon and night. Elena's job began when other people's jobs ended. She liked the quiet in theory, but in practice it had voices, squeaking carts, the shush of the mop, the irreverent jokes of the tired, the hiss of vents. The hospital at night is a ship that never docks. Elena learned its tides by the way the floors gathered footprints. Her son, Gabriel, slept under a blanket patterned with planets. When she tucked him in at dusk, the sky outside still argued with the sun about who owned the hour. A note on the fridge, a square of yellow optimism, held the week together. Bus times, school times, shift times. $50 did not live anywhere on that square. It lived in the cracks. The quarter you search for under the couch, the auto pay you pause, the fruit you don't buy. The citation arrived on a Thursday, ordinary in its font, officious in its margin. The offense was small enough to be plausible. A parking violation near the laundromat 3 weeks back. Ticket tucked under the wiper like a paper leaf. She had meant to pay it. She meant to do many things, but meaning surrenders to the calendar that other people write. When Gabriel woke with a hot forehead, the day chose him over the city's timetable. There is a flavor to poverty that is not hunger. It is timing. If you own your minutes, you can fix most problems. If you rent them from buses and shifts and babysitters, a small problem arrives with a large echo. Elena had a talent for quiet heroics, borrowing time without letting it feel borrowed. She carried her bus schedule like a relic, folded once for the hour, once more for the stop. She ran her life on the kindness of strangers' punctuality. The second notice came with the late fee and a tone that attempted neutrality and failed. The city cannot afford to personalize its voice. It speaks in italics. Elena put the paper under the magnet with the picture of Gabriel holding a paper sun. She told herself she would pay it Friday. On Friday, the night shift supervisor asked if she could stay through the second half of the floor. Double time in pay, but triple time in cost. She did the math fast. She said yes. $50 learned to wait. She could have asked for help. But poverty's other flavor is privacy. Asking divides you in half. The part that needs and the part that watches you need. She preferred to negotiate with time. She took the bus earlier, caught the next bus faster, slept less. Then one morning, in that gray hour when the city invents its commute, the bus never came. A driver called out sick. The schedule was rearranged with the clinical indifference of a spreadsheet. She stood at the stop with a couple that argued and a man with headphones who kept nodding to a song she couldn't hear. She checked her folded map again, as if the ink could will a vehicle into view. Elena did not miss the deadline by much. She missed it by the exact amount of time it takes a small life to fall behind a big system. A late fee arrived like a teacher marking a paper she had not been able to finish. The letter said failure to pay. Failure. A word that doesn't understand the word fever. She told Gabriel only what he needed. We have an errand at the courthouse, as if a courthouse were like a post office or a store where they sold time. He asked if he had to wear the shirt with the collar. She said yes, because mothers carry small humilities to pay off large ones. He tried to smooth his hair with water and his palm. Is the judge mean? He asked. Elena thought of judges as a category. Distant stars with names she didn't know. I think judges are busy, she said. In the mirror, she practiced not apologizing. She had grown up in a house where apologies were a currency used to rent peace. But the older she became, the more she understood that some apologies cost more than the relief they purchase. She practiced saying what happened without shaping it into an excuse. She practiced keeping her chin level. The Providence Municipal Court did not appear glamorous to anyone. It looked like what it was, a civic room devoted to sorting out friction. But Elena felt a ceremony in its scuffs. A city is a complicated neighborhood. You build trust by agreeing to have places like this where disagreements go to be made smaller. She arrived early, then waited long. Time, once again, bought and sold itself in front of her. She watched people go forward and come back. She catalogued expressions the way a nurse catalogues symptoms. There was the defensive shrug, the performed outrage, the over-humble nod. Very few faces carried dignity. Very few people know how to bring it with them when they enter a room that can rename you. When they called her name, she felt the room both open and close. Open, because now it was her turn to speak. Close, because now she could not hide behind other people's stories. She reached into her pocket and touched the folded schedule. Not for magic, for memory. It told her who she was, a person who, despite the math, had so far kept the buses and the work and the child and the sleep mostly in orbit. $50 was not a test of morality. It was a test of margin, and then she saw Judge Caprio clearly. He had the posture of someone who has sat through enough mornings to refuse boredom. His patience felt intentional. She didn't know that patience could be a kind of leadership until that moment. He nodded toward her without bending the formality. "Proceed," the nod said, "but take your time." The papers said, "Violation, amount, deadline." The city's clock had absorbed her delay and multiplied it into cost. On the bench, the judge moved through the docket with an economy of language that suggested respect for everyone's exhausted day. When her turn arrived, he glanced at the file, then at her. The room calibrated to listening. "Ms. Moreno," he began, "tell me what brought you here today." The sentence was standard. Its effect was not. "Tell me" is not the same as "admit to me." It opens a floor instead of a trap door. Elena could have said, "I failed to pay, Your Honor." That would have been accurate. But accuracy is sometimes too narrow to be true. She decided to risk the whole truth in a place built for partial ones. "My son was sick that week," she said. "I work nights at the hospital. I meant to pay it on Friday. The bus was late. I was late." The words came out like brooms, honest, workmanlike, unadorned. The judge waited. He did not reward or punish the tone. He inquired, "How old is your son?" "9. Is he well now?" "He's back in school." The courtroom shifted, almost imperceptibly. Law had asked about life. The clerk lowered a pen that had been ready to write a number. The public defender, who hadn't needed to stand, looked up anyway, as if warming a bench is also part of defense. The mechanism does not like context. Context is expensive. It demands listening, which demands time, which demands a budget. But justice is the one place where context isn't extra. It's the substance. Elena felt that as the judge's questions made a shape around her day, the violation was becoming a sentence in a paragraph, rather than the headline of a life. She added, "I can pay, just not all at once this week. I'm not asking to skip it." Pride leads some people into trouble. It had led her into persistence. There was a way to say "help me" without making herself smaller than she already felt. Judge Caprio looked down, measured the fact pattern, looked up. "You work at the hospital?" he asked. She nodded. "Night shift?" "Yes, Your Honor." He nodded the way a person nods when they've met fatigue before. Then he turned to the clerk. The language changed key. "Let me see the timeline on this." The clerk recited the dates. Citation issued, deadline missed, late fee imposed, notice mailed. Facts lined up neatly like tiles. The judge listened as if the dates were notes in a melody, and he was deciding if the music made sense. "The date of the missed deadline," he said, "coincides with—" He looked back at Elena. "Your son's fever?" "Yes," she said. She did not add the bus, the second bus, the way a city becomes an obstacle course when you're carrying a child's heat against your shoulder. She didn't have to. The room had already understood. There is a performative version of mercy that is really just storytelling seeking applause. This was not that. This was calibration. The judge did not pretend the law was optional. He treated it as adjustable within the truth of a day. He spoke to the clerk in numbers that felt like sentences. Reduction here, suspension there. Time to pay that mirrored the rhythms of a life, not the rhythm of a fine schedule. Then he did something small and exacting. He asked Elena to promise, not to him, to Gabriel. "If I structure this so you can manage it," he said, "can you promise your son you'll stay on top of it? Not just for the amount, but for the example?" A promise, properly requested, is a mirror. Elena saw herself in it. Tired, resourceful, stubborn, and saw her son, looking through it, back at her. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I promise." The clerk wrote something different than what she had been prepared to write. The courtroom, which earlier had felt like a tide that could carry Elena out to some colder sea, now felt like a harbor. Mercy did not mean the rules evaporated. It meant the rules remembered why they existed. At the bench, the judge added the words that turn mercy from a feeling into a policy. This court recognizes the circumstances and will adjust accordingly. The mechanism does not understand recognizes. It understands imposes. But the court is where the city keeps a human hand on the lever. Elena swallowed, the kind of swallow that resets a person's interior. She realized she had expected a different story. Humiliation, a mark on some record, a morning spent turning smaller. Instead, this room had translated a late payment into a life event, and then translated the life event into a fair consequence. You could build a city on that kind of translation. As she stepped back from the rail, the bus schedule pressed against her palm again. It was not a talisman now, it was a plan. $50 was still $50, but what it meant had changed. It no longer measured her character. It measured a week. She returned to the bench beside a man who had entered angry and now looked thoughtful. Perhaps he had watched the same exchange and remembered that listening is not weakness, and judgment is not a sport. Perhaps he would speak differently when his name was called. At the end of the row, an older woman dabbed at her eyes with the corner of a tissue. The court officer, who had seen everything and pretended to be impressed by nothing, cleared his throat in a way that sounded suspiciously like feeling. The room did not applaud. It didn't need to. The city had done something simple and radical and kept it quiet. That night, the city exhaled rain again. Elena rode the late bus home, her reflection ghosting against the window glass. In that dim transparency, she looked like two people. One who had survived a morning in court, and one who was still standing at the bench trying to understand why mercy felt heavier than punishment. The other passengers were half asleep, necks tilted in surrender. She watched their faces, seeing small economies of exhaustion. Men in paint-stained clothes, women in scrubs, teenagers with earbuds and ambition. Every one of them had debts invisible to paper. She clutched the folded document, the adjusted ruling, and read it again as if it might change. It didn't. It said, payment deferred, reduction granted, compliance requested. But between those printed lines, something else had been written. You are not your lateness. She had never thought of justice as listening. She'd grown up thinking justice was the invisible hammer that dropped when luck ran out. Now she realized, maybe it was the pause before the hammer. At home, Gabriel slept sideways on the bed, one leg over the blanket. She tucked him in without waking him, kissed his forehead and whispered, "We're okay." He stirred, murmuring something about the planets on his blanket. Mercury, or maybe Mars, a language she didn't fully speak anymore. In the small kitchen, she poured a glass of tap water and sat at the table where the letters still hung under the magnet. The new paper joined the others like a soft antidote. She wanted to feel relief, but something else arrived instead. Guilt. Why guilt? Because mercy implies someone has seen your vulnerability, and being seen is its own discomfort. Because now she owed not just the court, but the faith of a man who believed her. She replayed the judge's words. "Can you promise your son?" It echoed, not as pressure but as purpose. A promise is a fragile architecture. It holds only if both people keep believing in it. She turned the bus schedule over, drew a small heart beside next week's date, and wrote payment. For once, it wasn't fear organizing her week. It was gratitude and a quiet sense of responsibility. Outside, rain ticked the window like the city's pulse. She closed her eyes and imagined the courtroom light again. How even fluorescent bulbs can glow warm when humanity stands beneath them. Compassion doesn't erase difficulty. It only steadies it. By the next week, Elena's life resumed its rhythm. The mop's rhythm, the bus's rhythm, the quiet battles of endurance. But one morning, the hospital posted a schedule change. Her hours were cut. Fewer nights, fewer dollars. Inflation whispered through her grocery list. Her son's sneakers had split at the sole. The universe seemed to test whether mercy could survive mathematics. She stood at the bus stop, letter in hand, doing quick arithmetic that didn't favor her. The reduced fine was now within reach, but only if she sacrificed something else: food, transit, or sleep. The mechanism had retreated but hadn't disappeared. It waited in the fine print of every paycheck. Still, she had made a promise. And promises, she'd learned, are the only real wealth of the poor. They can't be taxed or repossessed. That afternoon, she went to the courthouse cashier window. The clerk, the same one who'd been in the courtroom, recognized her. "You're early," she said. Elena smiled almost shyly. "I said I'd pay." The clerk took the money, issued the receipt, and leaned forward a little. "You know," she said softly, He talks about cases like yours. Not by name, but he says every number has a heartbeat behind it. Elena blinked. He says that? Every time someone forgets why we're here. The words landed heavy. Behind every file, a person. Behind every person, a story. Behind every story, a city trying to decide if it still believes in mercy. She walked out into the street feeling both smaller and larger. Smaller because she was just one citizen among thousands. Larger because she'd briefly mattered in the machinery of justice. But life doesn't applaud quiet victories. At the hospital that night, she slipped in a puddle left by a careless intern. Her wrist took the fall, her pride the aftershock. The supervisor filed an incident report. The mechanism of work moved as impersonally as the mechanism of law. At home, she iced her wrist with frozen peas and told Gabriel it was fine. "You can't clean with one hand," he said. "I can manage." "Like the judge?" She smiled. Exactly like the judge. Weeks later, she returned to court, not for herself, but to testify as a witness in another minor case. A woman from her building, older, had been cited for a trash violation. Elena sat in the back row, silent, watching. When the judge entered, the same calm authority filled the room. The older woman stumbled through her explanation. Confusion, illness, no one to help. The clerk started to note the standard fine, but Elena saw it happen again. That same pause. The room shifted from policy to personhood. She realized that what Judge Caprio did wasn't mercy alone. It was recognition. The recognition that law without context is arithmetic without meaning. The woman left with tears and a fine reduced to almost nothing. On her way out, she turned, eyes meeting Elena's for a brief, wordless thank you, solidarity among the quietly judged. That moment clarified something. Mercy wasn't a rare act. It was a choice available to everyone who listens before deciding. That night, Elena told Gabriel the story. "Did she cry?" he asked. "A little." "Did the judge help her?" "Yes," he nodded. "Then, I think the world's still okay." Children have a way of ending moral arguments with clarity. Elena's confidence began to shift quietly. She applied for a new hospital department, cleaner hours, slightly better pay. In her interview, when asked about responsibility, she said, "I'm good at keeping promises." The supervisor smiled, not knowing the courtroom origin of those words. She got the job. Weeks later, she started volunteering at the community legal aid office, helping people fill out basic forms. She didn't know the law, but she knew fear of the law, which sometimes mattered more. She learned phrases like grace period, mitigation, circumstantial discretion. Fancy words for what Judge Caprio had done naturally, turning punishment into proportion. When she told the story to others, she didn't dramatize it. She just said, "He listened." And that simple phrase made others pause, because listening is rarer than verdicts. Months passed. The case faded from records, but not from memory. One morning, while sweeping the hospital lobby, she noticed a small crowd near the waiting room television. On screen was a familiar voice. It was Judge Caprio, featured in a local segment about compassion in court. The clip replayed the moment of her hearing. Anonymized, but unmistakable. She saw herself in silhouette, heard her own voice tremble slightly when she said, "I can pay, just not all at once." The reporter asked, "Judge, why do you show leniency so often?" He smiled, the same quiet smile she remembered. "I don't call it leniency," he said. "I call it justice that remembers we're all human." The crowd murmured approval. Elena stood still, mop in hand, eyes wet but proud. It wasn't about fame. It was about representation. Her small life had become evidence that decency still functioned somewhere. The clip ended. People drifted away. The screen returned to silent news. Elena resumed mopping, But the rhythm was lighter now, more deliberate. She wasn't erasing footprints anymore. She was part of the floor itself. Solid, steady, seen. A year later, the city replaced the courthouse benches. The old ones, worn smooth by stories, were auctioned for charity. Elena didn't bid, but she passed by one day and touched the wood before it was carried away. It felt like touching memory, civic, collective, tender. Gabriel was older, taller, his shoes intact this time. On the way to school, he asked, "Do you still owe the city money?" She laughed. "No, baby, I owe it gratitude." He thought for a moment. "For what?" "For reminding me that fairness still has a face." They walked through the drizzle toward the bus stop. Across the street, the courthouse flag shifted in the wind. She imagined all the people walking in with fear and out with relief, or vice versa, each one a story balancing between rule and grace.